Have you ever wondered what happens to your soul when your heart stops beating, your brain shuts down, and your body goes cold? For Jehovah's Witnesses, the answer is pretty simple. Your soul goes poof. It doesn't float off to heaven, hell, or some weird astral plane. It just stops working. Jehovah's Witnesses don't see the soul as some mystical, ghostly version of you. To them, it's more like a life force, kind of like a phone battery. When the battery dies, your body powers down. And that's it. They argue that the idea of an immortal soul is based on ancient Greek philosophy, not the teachings of Jesus or the Bible. So when you die, there's no eternity for your soul, just hard stop. And speaking of hard stops, let's talk about hell for a second. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that hell isn't a fiery pit filled with pitchfork wielding demons, it's just nothingness. According to their teachings, the Sheol or Hades mentioned in the Bible is basically a universal graveyard for the dead. What's crazy is that even the good people end up here. Your grandma who always baked cookies for the neighborhood kids. She's there too. Lucky for you, there's a way out. A resurrection for the righteous. To Jehovah's Witnesses, death is like being saved to a supernatural USB drive, ready to be re-uploaded later. The lucky ones who lived righteous lives are resurrected to live forever. But for the non-believers and the unrepentant, death isn't just a layover before eternal torment. It's the end, literally. Now, let's talk about how resurrection works for the people who do get resurrected. It happens in two phases. First, there are the anointed, an elite group of 144,000 disciples of Jesus who've already started their journey to heaven to rule alongside him. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus returned invisibly in 1914 and that this first resurrection is already underway. Next, we have the great crowd of witnesses. This group includes pretty much everyone who isn't part of the anointed, except, of course, the non-believers and unrepentant. All who are part of the great crowd will be resurrected to live on a paradise-like version of Earth, where there's no sickness, no death, and no pain. So to sum it all up, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that death is like falling into the deepest sleep imaginable. No dreams, no awareness, nothing. And whether you wake up or not is dependent on what you believed and the way you lived your life. Islam. So, you've lived your life, made decisions, some good, some questionable, and now it's lights out. In Islam, the afterlife is a full-on process. Here's what you need to know. When the time comes, you will meet Azrael, the angel of death. He's like the ultimate HR rep for souls sent by Allah SWT to clock you out of worldly life. 1 minute, you're sipping tea or doom scrolling, and the next, your soul is on its way out. Azrael's visit marks the end of your earthly life, which Muslims call dunya. Now it's time for some post-death rituals. Your family swings into action, starting with a full-body purification ritual. Then comes the funeral prayer. And finally, they lower you 6 feet under, alone. No phones, no snacks. Just you, the dirt, and 2 big scary angels on their way. When the angels, Munkar and Nakir, arrive, the first thing you will realize is that they didn't drop by to make small talk. They've got 3 critical questions for you. Who is your Lord? Who is your prophet? And what is your faith? Answer confidently, and you get to chill in peace until Judgment Day. Fail the test, and well, your grave will suddenly become more like a medieval torture dungeon than a resting place. Just like that, you've entered Barzakh, the limbo-like stage between worlds. If you lived a righteous life, you'll get VIP treatment, and all the good stuff. But if your track record wasn't great, let's just say you'll have a really hard time. Now you wait for the day of judgment. And here comes the surprise, no one knows when it'll happen. There are signs, though, things like the rise of the false Messiah and the return of the Prophet Isa, aka Jesus. When the day finally comes, there's a massive roll call. All of humanity is resurrected, and Allah SWT judges everyone based on their book of deeds. Everything you did is in there, even that one time you stole your siblings' fries. The next part is crossing the Sirat Bridge, which is more or less a tightrope stretched over the pit of hell. The righteous glide along effortlessly. But if you're on the naughty list, gravity isn't your friend, and you'll end up falling straight into the blazing fires of Jahannam. In Jahannam, you'll have to deal with scorching heat, boiling water, and endless regret. It's like being trapped in a nightmarish torture chamber with no escape. If you make it across the bridge, you will enter Jannah, the eternal paradise. Here you will have the time of your life, surrounded by cool shades, flowing rivers, endless feasts, and eternal happiness. It's a party with the most divine guest list ever. That said, you should probably do your best to live a righteous life, for obvious reasons. Greek mythology. When you died in ancient Greece, your soul was torn from your body and sent straight to the underworld to meet Hades, the king of the dead, who lived at the edges of the ocean beneath the earth's deepest layers. Given Hades' reputation, it's no surprise that the underworld wasn't exactly a happy place. It was a sunless, endless expanse where only the dead lived. It was so bad that Achilles, one of Greek mythology's greatest warriors, admitted to Odysseus that he'd rather struggle as a humble servant among the living than rule as a king in the underworld. Yikes. Despite the sad state of the underworld, the ancient Greeks deeply respected the dead. Philosophers like Plato even suggested that the gods' greatest gift to the deceased was ensuring their memory lived on among the living. Before burial, the body of the deceased was carefully cleaned, clothed, and prepared. A coin was placed in their mouth or in their eyes as payment for Charon, the ferryman tasked with transporting souls across the Styx River. This payment was non-negotiable. Charon didn't work for free, no coin, no crossing. Those who couldn't pay were doomed to wander in limbo, stuck between the worlds of the living and the dead forever. In ancient Greece, funerals were a big thing. Families buried their loved ones with jewelry, pottery, coins, and just about every other item they thought the spirit might need in the afterlife. But it didn't stop there. Family members would return to the tombs each year to bring fresh offerings and redecorate. Was it out of love? Sure. But it was also out of fear. In those days, people believed that neglecting the dead could bring back curses or bad luck to the living. After burial, the soul's journey to the afterlife would begin. Hermes, the god of travelers, would guide the ghosts to the underworld's entrance. From there, Charon would ferry them across the Styx or the Acherone, aka the River of Hate and the River of Woe. Once inside, the wandering soul would quickly realize that the underworld was a large, divided realm. At the heart of it all was Hades, ruling alongside his queen Persephone, with help from deities like Thanatos, the god of death, Hypnos, the god of sleep, Nyx, the goddess of night, and Hecate, the goddess of magic and witchcraft. The underworld was divided into different zones. Virtuous souls were sent to Elysium, a paradise of eternal peace. The wicked, alongside those who overindulged in earthly pleasures, were thrown into Tartarus, a pit of endless torment. And then there were the average souls who just wandered, forgotten, aimless and stuck in Hades' domain for all eternity. But not everyone accepted this fate. Take Orpheus, the legendary musician, for example. He used his enchanting music to sway even the gods, and when his bride Eurydice passed, he traveled to the underworld to rescue her. Persephone granted him permission to bring Eurydice back to the land of the living, but with one harsh condition. He couldn't turn around and look at her until they were both safely out of the underworld. Orpheus gave it his best shot, but doubt got the better of him. The moment he turned back, Eurydice vanished. Catholicism, purgatory. Catholics aren't the only ones who believe in purgatory. A good number of other denominations do too, though their views on what it is and what happens there differ slightly. For the next few minutes, though, we will be siding with the Catholics. The Catholic purgatory is an interesting concept, to say the least. Congratulations, you're saved. Then you die and learn you're not ready for heaven just yet. Instead, you find yourself in purgatory, a cosmic waiting room where your soul gets purified. According to the Church, even if your sins have been forgiven, your soul still needs to be purified from the lingering stains left by unhealthy attachments to the things of the flesh. The doctrine of purgatory is an important theme in Catholic theology because it comes up pretty often. While Catholics do believe in heaven and hell, the Church teaches about something called venial sins. These are the smaller sins that don't cut you off from God entirely, but they come with temporal punishment that you'll have to deal with in purgatory if you don't sort things out here. Thankfully, you're not alone in this. The living can actually help speed things along for the souls stuck in purgatory. Catholics believe in something called the communion of saints, which basically means that the good energy from the living and the saints in heaven can help purify souls faster. Think of it like getting extra credit on a group project. I would play nice with my loved ones if I were you. Catholics think of time in purgatory as a necessary transformation rather than punishment for punishment's sake. The theologian Joseph Ratzinger, who would go on to become Pope Benedict XVI, described it as a process where one becomes capable of God. If you think this all sounds abstract, you're probably right, but there's more. Some saints and mystics, like St. Catherine of Genoa, describe purgatory as a place of profound longing. Souls there apparently want to undergo purification because they're so desperate to be with God. It's pain, but with a purpose. Buddhism, rebirth. The first thing you should know about rebirth is that after you die, you might wake up as an animal or a ghost. Hold on, let me explain. The Buddhist afterlife isn't a straightforward heaven or hell situation. Instead, when you die, you get looped into an endless cycle of suffering, dissatisfaction, and pain. Your only ticket out is reaching a state called nirvana, where you no longer have cravings or wants, and so can no longer suffer. When you die, you don't just disappear, you just get reborn into one of 6 realms, and the criteria for where you go is karma. If you've been good, congratulations, you might find yourself in the human realm, or even chilling with the gods. But if you racked up bad karma in your lifetime, you could end up as a hungry ghost, or worse, in the hell realm. And that's not all. In some Buddhist traditions, for example, Tibetan Buddhism, there's some sort of middle zone between death and rebirth, called Bardo. In Bardo, your consciousness is sort of suspended for up to 49 days, trying to figure out its next move. While a handful of Buddhist traditions accepted this belief, the others weren't buying it. Oh, and by the way, Bardo isn't the only thing the different Buddhist traditions can't seem to agree on. Each sect has a varying opinion on what's actually being reborn during the rebirth process. Some believe that it's your vijnana, or consciousness that flows like a stream from life to life, while others argue that nothing physical or conscious carries over, only the consequences of your actions. Either way, next time you're tempted to skip a meditation session, you should think about this and maybe get in some good deeds before it's too late. Egyptian beliefs. The Egyptians believed that in the afterlife, their spirits had to survive a dangerous underworld journey, face trial with 43 divine judges, and pass the ultimate hard-weighing test to earn a spot in paradise. Living Egyptians didn't wait until death to get ready for the afterlife. They knew it was going to be a bureaucratic nightmare and wanted to be prepared. First up, shopping. Funerary essentials like protective charms, doll-like statuettes called shaptis, and custom copies of the Book of the Dead were must-haves. If you were rolling in wealth, you could splurge on jewel-covered coffins and private tombs. Now about those shaptis. They were creepy little figurines that came to life in the afterlife to do all your hard labor while you relaxed, possibly sipping paradise cocktails. When you die, your spirit would have to navigate a terrifying underworld filled with monstrous gatekeepers and mean gods. This is where having a Book of the Dead pays off. It's essentially a cheat sheet for passwords and spells to help you make it out in one piece. The goal is to reach Osiris, the god of the underworld, for your final judgment. But first, you had to plead your case. Now for the judgment part, your heart, ever the telltale organ, would be weighed against the feather of Manaat, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was heavier because of all the bad stuff you did, things wouldn't end well. Ammit the devourer would eat your heart, and your soul would be sent into eternal darkness. If the scales balanced, you'd head straight into paradise, also known as the Field of Rushes, a place of endless crops, sunny skies, and blue rivers, where you could farm for eternity or let your trusty shaptis handle the hard work. Hinduism. In Hinduism, after you say your final goodbye to the world, you'll find yourself in the celestial courtroom of Yama, the god of death, and he won't be alone. Chitragupta, his trusty accountant, will be there with the ultimate receipt book, detailing every single deed you've done, good or bad. Oh, and Varuna, the universal spy master, will also be present, just to remind you that someone was watching you the whole time. At some point, they will whip out a mirror, Not just any mirror, but one that replays every cringe moment of your life. Remember that time you cut in line or ghosted someone? Yep, that's on replay. Based on this celestial performance review, you'll either be sent up to Svarga, Hindu heaven, for some R&R, or down to Naraka, Hindu hell, to be punished. Svarga isn't forever, it's more like an all-expense-paid vacation with an expiration date. You'll hang out with divine beings, enjoy heavenly pleasures, and basically live your best life until your good karma runs out. Naraka, on the other hand, is like an escape room from hell, literally. The punishments are custom tailored to your sins, but lucky for you, it's not eternal. Once you've paid your dues, you're free to move on. When your stint in either place is up, it's reincarnation time. Your Atman, or consciousness, moves on to its next life. Depending on your karma and even your final thoughts at the moment of death, you could come back as anything: a human, a god, an animal, or if you're really unlucky, a hungry ghost known as a prete. That's right. Whatever is on your mind at the moment of death could decide whether you're reborn as a prince or a pigeon. No pressure though. Just chant those mantras like your afterlife depends on it. Because it does. Speaking of hungry ghosts, let's dive into Pratarda. Pratardas are unlucky souls trapped on Earth and cursed with an insatiable hunger and thirst. They are typically the souls of people who were corrupt, compulsive, deceitful, jealous, or greedy while alive. They're often depicted as human-like figures with sunken skin, long, thin necks, and big bellies. Get it? Because they're always hungry. So maybe that one fell flat. Pratas can only be freed through specific rituals, which often involve offerings, prayers, and priests chanting ancient texts, but that's a whole different story. If at any point you're tired of the whole reincarnation loop, there's one ultimate goal: moksha. Think of it as cosmic retirement. No more birth, no more death, no more drama. Instead, your Atman merges with Brahman, the ultimate reality, and you exist in eternal blissful liberation. Mormonism. The Mormon afterlife is like someone took the concept of heaven and hell and decided to make it a lot more complex, with a bunch of different levels, sort of like a tiered subscription plan. Step 1, you die. After that, your spirit makes a pit stop in one of two places. If you lived a decent life, you would be sent to spirit paradise, where you can chill, relax, and wait for the second coming of Christ. But if you weren't so great, welcome to spirit prison. The good news is that it's not exactly a fiery dungeon. The bad news: guilt, regret, and spiritual FOMO are the main attractions. Oh, and no matter where you end up, everyone's bummed out because they're stuck without their bodies, which apparently is a big deal. Fast forward to Judgment Day, when God decides your eternal fate. The Mormon afterlife has 3 kingdoms of glory ranked from gold membership to at least you made it in. The Celestial Kingdom is the top-tier package. It's more or less the VIP lounge of the afterlife. Only devout, baptized Mormons who checked all the boxes, including eternal temple marriage, get in here. And yes, it's divided into 3 sublevels, because apparently even the elite need a hierarchy. The top-tier folks get to hang out full-time with God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost. Not much is said about what the people in the lower celestial tiers are up to, but hey, they're still doing better than everyone else. The middle tier is called the Terrestrial Kingdom, and it's reserved for honorable people who were blinded by the craftiness of men while on Earth. You can think of them as good people who didn't quite make the cut. They get occasional hangouts with Jesus. But God the Father is off limits. The last level is the Telestial Kingdom, aka the Afterlife Probation Zone. This is where the unrepentant sinners and those who couldn't get their act together end up. There's no God here, no Jesus either, just the Holy Ghost dropping by occasionally to keep things running. Before you settle into this kingdom, you have to suffer for your sins first, so yay! At Christ's second coming, people destined for the celestial and terrestrial realms will be resurrected to live on Earth under Jesus' personal rule for 1,000 years. Sadly, those headed for the Celestial Kingdom have to wait it out. They remain stuck in limbo without their physical bodies. If you really messed up while on Earth, there's one last destination: the outer darkness. This is the no-hope zone for people who knew Christ was legit, but still said, nah, I'm good. It's actually a lot more complex than that, but we are sticking with the basics. The outer darkness is often referred to as Mormon hell, eternal despair, no gods, and definitely no upgrades. Yep, definitely hell. Shintoism, or the way of the gods, is one of Japan's oldest belief systems. And when it comes to the afterlife, it's got some really fascinating theories. When a Shinto believer dies, their kami, which is basically their spiritual energy or essence, breaks free from the body and heads off to one of a few destinations. First up, there's Takamagahara, essentially Shinto heaven, where the VIP deities kick back. Then there's Yomi, the underworld, which is about as welcoming as a moldy basement, dark, damp, and generally unpleasant. Lastly, there's Tokoyo, a mysterious place just beyond the sea. Unlike the others, Tokoyo isn't all that flashy or grim. In Shintoism, your kami doesn't get to clock out and relax just because you're dead. It still needs food, drink, and maybe even some entertainment to keep things going. Through rituals and prayers, families honor their ancestors, and in return, the kami keeps an eye on them. But fair warning, you've got to keep up those offerings, or you might end up with a moody ghost situation. Dying in Shinto isn't a simple lights out deal. For a smooth transition, you've got to leave the world with no grudges, regrets, or unresolved drama. Forget about that friend who owes you money. If you hold on to it, you might end up haunting them or something just as crazy. Now, because Japan has a knack for blending traditions, Buddhism brought its own ideas to the party. Cremation became the standard, and concepts like Jodo or Pure Land and Jugoku, a fiery, icy hell, joined the mix. Fun fact, Jugoku isn't just a spooky metaphor. There are actual places in Japan like Beppu and Mount Osor, where bubbling hot springs and sulfur clouds are said to mark the entrances to this hellish underworld. Imagine dying and finding out your portal to the afterlife is in a literal volcanic hotspot. Yikes. One of the most beautiful traditions tied to the Shinto afterlife is Obon, a summer festival where the spirits of ancestors are invited back for a visit. During this time, families go all out cleaning graves, offering food and flowers, and lighting up colorful lanterns to guide the spirits home. There's even the Bon Odori dance, which is more or less a cheerful ghost reunion. If you've got good kami vibes and a diligent family, the afterlife might not be so bad after all. Sikhism. Imagine a life where every decision you make determines if your soul takes a step closer to freedom or tumbles down into another lifetime as, say, a goat. That's the Sikh perspective on the afterlife. In Sikhism, humans are not the only creatures with souls. All living beings have them, including animals. The soul is a divine spark, a gift from God who they refer to as Waheguru, and it goes through something called the cycle of samsara. If you screw things up during your lifetime, you risk cycling through 8.4 million life forms in an endless cycle of reincarnation. Now, that's a lot of costume changes. But that's not all. The body your soul gets assigned to in its next life isn't random, much like the Buddhist afterlife. Your fate will be determined by karma. Put it simply, every action, word, and even your thoughts leave a mark on your karmic scorecard. Rack up enough good karma, and you might land a human body. But if you screw things up, well, I hope you enjoy being a cockroach. Humans hold a special place in Sikhism because we have the unique ability to break free from samsara, aka the seemingly endless reincarnation cycle. This liberation is the ultimate goal, and it's achieved when the soul merges with Witnessy Guru and returns to the source of all creation. No more lifetimes, no more suffering, just eternal peace. But how do you get there? The Sikhs believe that being liberated is dependent on the grace of Witnessy Guru, but good deeds are also important. That part is actually pretty straightforward. First, there's Karat Karni, which means you have to earn an honest living. No stealing, cheating, or pyramid schemes. Next, there's Van Shakna. This one's all about sharing what you have with others. So think communal meals, and you'll probably get brownie points for not hoarding snacks. Another thing you have to do is meditate on God's name. In Sikhism, this practice is called Nam Japna, and it roughly translates to remembrance of God. There are a lot more rules, but I'm sure you get the idea. For Sikhs, death isn't an end, It's a checkpoint. The body is merely a vessel for the soul, which moves on to its next destiny based on the karma it's accumulated. The idea of being stuck in an eternal loop of existence can be unsettling, but it's also deeply hopeful because no matter how many lifetimes it takes, the soul is always moving towards liberation. Judaism, unlike many of the belief systems we have explored so far, Judaism doesn't give us a crystal clear roadmap to the afterlife. For starters, it focuses heavily on this world and prioritizes things like good deeds, helping others, and making this earthly life count. It's not that Jews don't care about what happens after we die. It's just that they're too busy living their best lives to stress over it. That said, here's what we know about the world to come, which to many Jews is the afterlife. It's a perfected version of existence, where life is full of sunshine, rainbows, and eternal bliss. But it only arrives after the Messiah makes a grand entrance, judgment is passed, and the righteous are ushered into their happily ever after. The problem is, no one's sure when that's going to happen. Now, let's talk about destinations. First up, we have Gan Eden, the Jewish idea of heaven. Gan Eden isn't your usual cloud surfing, harp playing setup. Instead, it is described by some as a state of pure closeness to God, where souls bask in divine light. Some others imagine Gan Eden as a restored Garden of Eden, where everyone sits around a giant table eating in peace. But before you get your ticket to Gan Eden, there's a pit stop to consider. Sheol. This is less hell and more of a waiting room. But instead of a boring room, with old magazines and terrible elevator music, it's a shadowy, soul-cleansing pit. Some souls are sent here to be cleansed and purified before moving on. And then there's Gehenna, which, well, let's just say you don't want to end up there. It's the place for torment and punishment, reserved for those who've really messed up, murderers, traitors, people who wear skinny jeans. The good news is, in Judaism, this torment isn't eternal. Most souls get a time limit before they move on, unless, of course, they were the worst of the worst. Now, it wouldn't be Judaism without a good resurrection plot twist. With it, many Orthodox Jews believe that when the Messiah shows up, the dead will literally rise again. Because of this belief, traditional Jewish burial customs strictly forbid cremation. You've got to keep the body intact for its big comeback. Aztecs. In Aztec mythology, violent deaths seem to be the golden ticket to the best afterlives. If you died in battle or were sacrificed, congratulations, you hit the Aztec afterlife jackpot. Warriors who died in combat or on the altar went on to an eastern paradise, where they helped lift the sun every morning. And after a few years, they transformed into hummingbirds and butterflies. Women who died in childbirth were considered warriors too, and ended up in a similar paradise. But in the West, their job was to help lower the sun at the end of the day. Merchants who lost their lives while embarking on dangerous trips were considered VIPs in the Aztec afterlife. There was a special place reserved for them somewhere in the 13 layers of Aztec heaven. People who drowned or were struck by lightning also made the cut. They were believed to be handpicked by the rain god Tlaloc to chill in his lush flower-filled paradise. Before you start wishing you were among the Aztecs, you should know that the afterlife wasn't like that for everyone. In fact, most people didn't get anything that fancy. Regular folks got the short end of the afterlife stick. If you died an ordinary death, like say from illness or old age, you were sent on a 4-year journey to Mictlan, the land of the dead. And trust me, it wasn't a fun trip. Mictlan was a dark, windowless underworld far from the peaceful paradises warriors and mothers got to enjoy. The journey there was filled with terrifying trials, because apparently nothing was easy when it came to ancient civilizations and the afterlife. First, you had to pass through 9 levels of obstacles, each more horrifying than the last. There were paths swarming with snakes, winds sharp enough to slice your skin, demons eager to eat your heart, and mountains smashing together to crush you as you passed. At one point, you'd face a river of blood filled with jaguars ready to attack. Luckily, you weren't completely on your own. The Aztecs believed a spirit dog named Xelotl guided souls through the underworld. This trusty canine would help you cross rivers and survive other dangers. Without your dog, you were as good as stuck. After 4 years of enduring these horrors, you'd finally reach the ninth and final level of Mictlan. There you'd meet Mictlan Tekelthal, the Lord of Death, and his equally terrifying wife, Mikla-Tekelthal. Miklan-Tekelthal is often described as a partially decayed skeleton with a necklace of human eyeballs, claws for hands, and a hunger for human flesh. Pretty nice guy. He was often accompanied by bats, scorpions, and spiders, or whatever other creepy animals he felt like hanging out with that day. Catholicism, limbo. This one's actually pretty grim. According to Catholic theology, limbo is an in-between place where the souls of unbaptized babies and anyone else who only has original sin might go after they die. But fun fact, the church has never made it official, so ironically, limbo itself is in limbo. The idea of limbo started gaining traction through theological debates in the Middle Ages. It was an attempt to address a tough question. What happens to the soul of infants who die without baptism? Theologians proposed limbo as a state where these souls wouldn't suffer physical torments. No hellfire here, but would be forever deprived of the vision of God or beatific vision. In 1439, the Council of Florence affirmed that those who die in a state of original sin do not experience the same torments as those in mortal sin. However, it didn't explicitly name or define limbo. Over time, the concept gained enough acceptance among theologians and became a common, though unofficial, part of Catholic belief. By the 18th century, Pope Pius VI defended limbo against critics who dismissed it as an Pelagian fairy tale. In his 1794 document Auctorem Fidei, he didn't define limbo as a doctrine, but stated it wasn't heretical to believe in it. Think of limbo as a Catholic headcanon, widely accepted for centuries, but never officially required. In 2007, things took a turn when Pope Benedict XVI approved a document called the Hope of Salvation for Infants who die without being baptized. This shifted limbo from common doctrine to a maybe. The Church has since then shifted its focus to God's mercy, suggesting that unbaptized babies might still be saved through mysterious divine ways. So is limbo canceled? Not entirely. The Catholic Church doesn't require belief in it anymore, but it hasn't officially tossed it out either. These days, the focus is more on hope over fear. Slavic paganism. In the Slavic afterlife, the first thing you need to know is that you're on your own. The second thing is that you may not make it out alive, even though technically you're already dead. Let's break it down, shall we? The Slavs believed in 3 realms. First up, there's Prav, the realm of the gods. It's paradise, but only for the select few who lived righteously enough to impress the divine beings. Next is Yav, the realm of the living. The Slavs thought of it as a transitional space where the living try to prepare their souls for the challenges ahead. And then there's Nav, sometimes called Nath, the realm of the dead. It's dark, subterranean, and crawling with creepy spirits, demons, and otherworldly creatures. Dying, as it turns out, is just the beginning. Your adventure into the afterlife will kick off with a dangerous journey across the River Smerodina, the Slavic equivalent of the River Styx. Except, unlike Styx, there's no cute little boat to get you across. Nope, you're on your own. The only way across is the Kalinov Bridge, which doesn't sound so bad until you realize it's a flaming, rickety death trap. Oh, and it's guarded by Chudo Yudo, a terrifying beast with fiery eyes who's just itching to make your life, or death, depending on how you look at it, miserable. To cross, you'll have to endure scorching flames, a river that smells like a compost bin gone rogue, and Chudo Yudo,